Feeling depressed. Over 2 years after my alcoholic sister was kicked out. I apologize for the poor quality of my writing in this post. I have never used Reddit before. For some context, while growing up, my sister, who is 3 years older than me, was always quite shy and was a bit of a nerd. She was never aggressive during our childhood, which has always puzzled me. She didn't have many friends in school, so at the age of 17, she began traveling to the nearest city to connect with others. Unfortunately, she fell in with the wrong crowd and started using drugs and alcohol. She also began attending college in the city and would commute from home, which is when she typically encountered these new people. By that point, she was still living at home, and my family was unaware of her activities. Our family consists of me, my sister, and our parents, who are divorced, leading me to alternate between their homes weekly. By mid-2022, I was 15, and she had just turned 18. Her behavior began to shift, and she became increasingly rude to our parents, often storming out of the house and engaging in shouting matches. While I know this is somewhat typical for some teenagers, just a few years earlier, she could hardly speak due to anxiety. She also came out as transgender, male to female, which I believe contributed to her mental health struggles and possibly marks the beginning of her difficulties. When she came out as transgender, she called my mom while on a train returning from the city, which is about 40 minutes away since I live by the coast. My mom was not home at the time, but she cried and acted as though she had lost a child. She never exhibited this vulnerability in front of my sister, only me. She was supportive of my sister publicly. This is where I believe the issues began, and I hold myself somewhat responsible for what followed. The next time I was transitioning from my mom's to my dad's house, my sister was absent since she had gone to the city to spend time with her friends. My parents were discussing her situation, and my dad made some offensive jokes. Unfortunately, I decided to inform my sister about this, a decision I now regret, thinking it was appropriate for her to know. She thanked me for the information, and when she returned home, she acted normally and did not bring it up. By October 2022, she was on medication for anxiety and depression, often returning home reeking of alcohol, which she tried to conceal from our parents. This marked the turning point where her situation deteriorated. She was prohibited from drinking while on her medication, but attempted to hide it nonetheless. One night, she entered my room in tears because one of her friends had cut contact with her and begged to use my phone to call them. When they did not answer, she began sharing details about some traumatic experiences from her past that I struggle to recall fully. The most striking memory is when she disclosed that she had been sexually assaulted by a close family friend during her childhood and made me promise not to tell anyone. She never revealed the friend's name. She abruptly left for the store at 8 p.m., and by 8:30 p.m., my mom received a call from a stranger stating that my sister had collapsed in an alley. My mom had to pick her up and bring her home, where she was clearly unwell and retreated to her room. My mom was understandably shaken and did not know how to respond, while my sister vanished into her room afterward. Later that night, around 1 a.m., we were all awakened by the sound of my sister dropping plates in the kitchen and shouting that she needed an ambulance, while also yelling about how terrible our parents were. My mom drove her to the hospital that night because she had overdosed on her medication. The following day, my parents held their first intervention, where they expressed their love for her, told her she couldn't drink anymore, and that she needed to stop her destructive behavior. They were unaware of her alcohol consumption, believing her actions stemmed from irresponsibility. I made the foolish decision not to inform them about her disclosure regarding the assault, which, in hindsight, I should have done sooner. After that incident, I hoped she would improve, and for a few months, she genuinely tried, but by March 2023, things took a turn for the worse again. At that point, she had secretly resumed drinking, and it was evident. She neglected her self-care and became increasingly aggressive towards everyone. Each day felt like a new confrontation in our home. She frequently told me that I was a terrible brother and had ruined our relationship. We had been very close prior to this downturn, but after Christmas 2022, as she spiraled, we began to drift apart. She would accuse me of wanting her to die and of being the reason for our fractured relationship. Whenever I denied her claims, she became even more furious. It reached a point where my parents admitted they were relieved when my sister and I alternated between each parent each week, because it spared them the daily arguments with her. One night in March, she returned from college around 6 p.m. She had skipped class to drink, while my dad came home from work at 7. She was already behaving rudely and was extremely intoxicated. When my dad arrived, I pointed out her behavior, and he was already frustrated after discovering a multitude of empty vodka bottles in her room. He went up to confront her, and I could hear the shouting match from downstairs. He returned after some time and informed me she was threatening to leave and asked me to keep her occupied while he contacted my mom to come over and intervene. They were worried about her being in the same state she had been in the night she collapsed, fearing for her safety if she were left alone outside. When it was just the two of us in her room, she cried while packing her bags and expressed how terrible our parents had been to her throughout her childhood and how they had both abused her, which was not true. Shortly thereafter, my mom arrived, and I was asked to step out. That's when the situation escalated. While I stood outside her room, my parents were inside with her, and she began to strangle my dad as he blocked the door while shouting that she would call the police. My now stepmother, who is a mental health nurse, also arrived and attempted to help. She stayed in my sister's room for a while, discussing things with her, while I, my mom, dad, and stepsister remained in the hallway. At that point, I broke down and shared my sister's past trauma with my parents, crying. I felt I could no longer keep it to myself. My sister spent hours shouting about how horrible we all were as my dad held her back from attempting to leave. While it might sound like my parents were in the wrong, my sister was in a fragile mental state and could have found herself in serious danger if she managed to escape. Eventually, the police arrived, and she calmed down enough to go to bed. I spent the night at my mom's house, and my parents held another intervention a few days later, during which she even acknowledged her unacceptable behavior and admitted her alcohol use contributed to it. However, she claimed her account of the past assault was fabricated and that I had invented it. My dad stated there had never been a time when my sister was alone with a family friend, leaving me uncertain about the validity of her claim. Around Easter 2023, she also got involved in a physical altercation in the city and had to pay a fine or risk receiving a criminal record, which displeased my parents. She improved somewhat for a few months, but eventually she fell back into alcohol use, which worsened her situation. It was on my dad's wedding day, June 21st, that she overindulged, got into heated arguments with guests, and claimed that my father had been abusive and terrible to her. After the reception, she continued to argue with others. The following day, she returned home, acted as if nothing had occurred, and subsequently traveled to the city for 4 days to attend an Arctic Monkeys concert, staying overnight at a friend's house. Upon her return, she was drunk again, refused to bathe, and said terrible things to me and my mom. On June 28th, after returning from school on the last day before summer vacation, they informed me that they had kicked my sister out due to their inability to cope anymore. They did not sever all ties. Had she not had anywhere to go, they would not have allowed her to be homeless. My parents also checked with me several times to see how I felt about the situation, but I was emotionally numb from the last 8 months of turmoil with her, so I responded that I was fine. Additionally, during that summer, my grandfather was diagnosed with cancer and given 6 months to live, causing my parents considerable distress. My mom also cut contact with her sister due to their strained relationship, adding to the overall tension in our household. My sister was placed in emergency housing until she could secure a place in social housing. Initially, she continued her rude behavior and kicked my mom out several times, but eventually, she began to show improvement. She would join us for dinner once a week while I was at my mom's house. Although her relationship with our father never fully restored to its previous state, she started to appear somewhat better. However, there were times when she made odd remarks, such as asking if I was happy about her being kicked out. I found myself unsure of how to respond. Fast forward to November 2024. She moved to the city, distanced herself from her detrimental friends from years prior, and finally seems genuinely happy, having overcome the turmoil associated with alcohol and drugs. I attribute her struggles to the sheer weight of her experiences, grappling with her transgender identity, and the substances used as escapism, which ultimately led to disastrous consequences. Since December, I've been reflecting on these past events and feeling somewhat depressed about it. My relationship with my sister has never fully healed to its former closeness. In fact, I have not spoken to her since the beginning of January. I sometimes feel as though I should have moved on by now, given that it has been nearly 2 years, but I always buried these feelings, and now that it seems the ordeal is genuinely over and she has moved away, those emotions have resurfaced in an overwhelming way. I am not usually an emotional person. I hardly cry at anything. In fact, the last time I cried was when I revealed the abuse to my parents. In recent months, I've found myself reflecting on everything more and feeling increasingly worse about it. I tear up each night, thinking about how challenging things were at the time and how strained our relationship is now. It feels suffocating, and I am left with the impression that I played a significant part in her struggles. She was the only person I could confide in before. I feel somewhat embarrassed discussing these matters with my family since they are all moving forward. I feel as if I am stuck in the past, as if I were 15 again, reliving the experience. I don't particularly enjoy talking about it with my friends. They know about it since I initially made light of the situation when she was first kicked out, trying to downplay it, but I no longer do that, and they avoid mentioning it, understandably so. I simply wanted to express my thoughts, and also inquire if anyone else has gone through something similar. It feels like I am grieving 2 years after the fact for a terrible situation. Thank you for reading this. I realize it may not seem coherent, but I needed to articulate my feelings at this early hour. Story 2. M29 needs advice on whether she, 29F, has feelings for me or not. We were in a relationship from 2011 to 2019, but it ended badly. Following the breakup, she began dating a friend who had a role in it, and I teased her about dating him. She frequently mentioned that he, the friend, whom we will refer to as A, was very understanding, but I am unsure if they are still dating because I have never felt comfortable asking her directly, as it makes me anxious and affects my mood. Their relationship has always been long distance. From 2020 to 2024, we spent considerable time together, holding hands when we were out and cuddling at home. I never objected to this because I was still in love with her, but I made a significant mistake in 2021 when I tried to make her jealous by flirting with her friend. This backfired terribly, and she was very disappointed in me. Nonetheless, I attempted to rebuild her trust, or so I believed, as things gradually returned to normal and we spent most of our time together. While our outings diminished, holding hands, taking care of each other, and planning our birthdays continued, leading others to assume we were back together, even though they would often tease us by saying we were just friends. We went on a trip to Thailand in November, where we were inseparable, and I began considering proposing to her on her birthday, which is February 12. However, we had a few arguments in November and December, and I was quite busy with work, which caused us to talk less. Yet, whenever we met, we were still affectionate and walked hand in hand, so I didn't believe anything had changed. On January 25, I was suffering from a high fever of 103 degrees, and I hoped for a text or call from her. Instead, she didn't reach out because she was also sick and had attended a family function. When she called me late that night, I threw a childish tantrum and told her I didn't want to talk. She didn't respond, and the next morning I acted childishly by saying it hurt that she texted after I was feeling better. During our conversation, she repeatedly asked me to go to the library with her, but I couldn't make time, so I explained that it wasn't possible for me at that moment. At a family function, she met a guy, let's call him B, and discovered he frequented a library nearby. She began going to the library with him, and it became a regular occurrence. On her birthday, she invited him, which surprised everyone, as she typically doesn't invite anyone unless they are very close to her. During the celebration, he tried hard to impress her, which was very cringeworthy and ruined my mood entirely. When she called me over for pictures, I declined because I had told her that if I saw another guy trying to impress her and she didn't clarify the situation with him, I would step aside instead of competing for her affection. The following day, while we were spending time together, she expressed that due to all the chaos, we hadn't had time alone on her birthday as we usually did. During our discussion, I mentioned my discomfort regarding BTK's behavior the previous day, finding it cringeworthy and inappropriate. She reacted negatively, saying, "You, don't say that. I doubt he was acting like that." I explained that this was simply my perspective as a boy. She agreed, but noted that when she was taking a photo with him, he was so close that it felt odd, assuring me that there was nothing romantic between them. I called her to ask for help during a medical emergency, but she didn't pick up. Later, she explained she was at the library, and this led to a significant fight. In the heat of the moment, I revealed that I was planning to propose to her. This argument continued for several days, during which she spent time with B every evening. By that time, she had discussed her birthday with him, and he confessed he liked her. However, she was honest enough to tell me that she didn't like him, which made me uncomfortable since they were spending time together in the evenings. When I asked her why she didn't respond to my proposal, she said she didn't believe a relationship between us would work out because we couldn't trust each other. The next morning, I went to her house, brought her flowers, and apologized for the emergency situation and the fights related to B. I had previously told her that if she started liking someone, she should at least inform me about it, but according to her, that wasn't the case, and I had overreacted. During this time, she had not been communicating with me properly or replying to my messages, but yesterday she unexpectedly called me, saying her pet was seriously ill. We had taken care of that pet together for a long time, so I rushed over and we went to the hospital, handling everything needed. After we returned and settled on separate sofas, I thanked her for trusting me and calling me. She replied that she knew she could trust me in some situations, but not when it came to relationships. I asked her if that meant she could trust me in other matters but not in relationships, and she confirmed that was the case. I explained that for her to trust me in a relationship, she would need to give me a chance, emphasizing that trust is something built over time, and I am willing to work on it. However, she stated that it was not possible because when I had asked her to marry me, she had said no. My response at that time had been that we couldn't get married before addressing and resolving all our differences. She had to attend another function where her family had gone ahead of her, and B was also going, so they went together. She asked for my help selecting clothes for the occasion, and we ended up discussing B and her feelings about guys who drink and smoke. She mentioned that B used to drink and was trying to quit smoking, which he had told her, and she had made it clear to him that she does not approve of smoking at all. I responded by saying that this meant I didn't have to worry about him, given her strong aversion to smoking, which would seemingly eliminate any chance he had. She remained silent, and when I suggested that I should relax a bit and not be worried about him, she said, "What if something happens between him and me? What will you do then? You won't be able to do anything." I replied that obviously, if something develops between them, there would be nothing I could do, but I didn't believe she would change such a fundamental aspect of her values, her zero tolerance for smoking for him. She got ready and went to the function, and everything seemed fine. Out of the blue, my best friend called and told her that she had only two options: either cut me out entirely or enter into a relationship with me. That night, we were texting, and she said she wanted to clarify everything for me, emphasizing that I mattered to her and she cared about me deeply. She indicated that she didn't think it was possible for us to be together, noting that it had been 5 to 6 years since our breakup, and we didn't trust each other. I asked her if her point was that it had been so long since our breakup that she felt nothing for me now due to my past actions, specifically, how I flirted with her friend to make her jealous, which had backfired and ruined their friendship. She confirmed this was the case, adding that before the incident with her friend, she had held on to hope and believed there was a chance for us to reconcile, but that incident shattered her trust in me. I expressed my remorse for that and mentioned that I had been seeking her forgiveness for years. I assured her that I was no longer the same foolish person I had once been. I stated that I had always wanted to start fresh with her, so if she felt nothing for me now because of the significant time gap, I would be willing to begin from scratch, as if we had never dated. She replied that since I had broken her trust, she had been overlooking everything and was merely being friends with me. She expressed that I meant a lot to her, and that if anything were to happen, she would take care of me, but she didn't see a viable future between us. I countered that we had been acting like a couple all this time. Intimacy doesn't only consist of being affectionate, as it encompasses various aspects, and everyone could see that we were more than just friends. However, I always told others that I couldn't define our relationship until she realized it herself. Therefore, I asked for help to determine whether she has feelings for me, like someone else, or is trying to ignore her feelings for me. Story 3. Am I the a-hole for scolding my daughter and telling her to stop being so sensitive when she had a meltdown last month while we were at Disney World? I understand this is a lengthy account, and I apologize if some sections are unclear or difficult to follow, but I kindly ask you to read the entire post, as I am seeking guidance. My daughter, who is 15 years old and has autism, is extremely sensitive and tends to cry easily. My husband and I have discussed with her numerous times about her sensitivity and how she needs to manage it, especially when we express irritation towards her, which often leads to tears. However, she continues to struggle with this. Last month, while we were dining at Epcot Center, the venue that gives the appearance of being in space, complete with a ride that mimics a rocket launch, my daughter loudly repeated something my husband had said, seeking clarification. I became irritated and told her to be quiet, adding a gosh at the end for emphasis. Afterward, when she asked for clarification on what I had said, my irritation grew and I couldn't hide it. My discomfort was partly due to a toothache, which contributed to my grumpiness. As we stood up to leave, I hugged my daughter, feeling guilty for my earlier irritation. I reassured her we would return to our hotel room soon, where she could enjoy her lollipop, which her dad had purchased for her earlier, and watch Family Guy, as she had planned. Despite this, as we walked toward the exit, she began to scream and whine loudly. We admonished her, instructing her to stop, but she did not listen. Approaching the ride that creates the illusion of traveling back to Earth, my daughter's whining escalated, and she started to have a meltdown. We repeatedly told her to stop, but my frustration peaked when I called her a brat during one of her outbursts, feeling severely irritated at that moment. Once the ride ended, my daughter managed to say hello to someone, still upset. Given her state, I didn't want her interacting with others and instructed her to cease her greetings. In response, she looked at me and spat in my face. Overcome with embarrassment, I informed her that I no longer wished to go to Magic Kingdom the following day and that I didn't care if she and her dad decided to go without me. Upon exiting the building, she returned to her wheelchair, which she uses because her autism causes fatigue during long walks. However, she continued to whine incessantly. At this point, I told her to be quiet and to stop, as my irritation was growing stronger. After a few minutes of silence while my husband pushed her wheelchair, I pointed out that her sensitivity had triggered her outburst. I explained that her reaction began when I asked her to be quiet after she had repeated something loudly, emphasizing that people are allowed to feel irritated with her. In turn, she began to whine and cry, expressing her distress over my comments about her sensitivity, which she despises hearing. I retorted, "Well, then don't be sensitive," and she persisted in her whining and arguing. Her dad chimed in, stating, "You're upset about being called too sensitive, which is also being too sensitive," a sentiment I fully endorsed. As we continued making our way toward the park exit for the Skyliners, my husband scolded her, but she retaliated by telling him to shut up. Infuriated, he ordered her to get up and walk the remainder of the distance, expressing his fatigue from pushing her. She refused, but he granted her another chance. Minutes later, when she cursed at him again, he insisted she get up, and once more she declined. I warned her that if she didn't get up, we would have to call security. Defiant, she still refused and fought us, so we decided to give her one last chance, instructing her not to speak again. She remained silent for the rest of the journey, but when we reached the wheelchair return area, I noticed she was crying profusely. During our walk, she confided in her dad that she was crying hard and struggling to breathe. He advised her to calm down. A few moments later, her cries intensified, and I could hear her gasping, though it was nothing serious, not life-threatening. In disbelief, I expressed my concern that, at 15 years old, we were experiencing this situation. Once we reached the Skyliners and sat down, more passengers joined us. My daughter sat quietly, looking out the window while continuing to cry, inhaling and exhaling as if struggling for air. I asked her to stop, but she claimed she couldn't help it. I countered that she had more control than she demonstrated, and she whispered that she wished she had never been born not out of genuine feelings, but to garner attention. I insisted she stop, which she did momentarily, but then she glanced at the other passengers to observe their reactions. After disembarking from the Skyliner, we boarded another one, this time just the three of us. Although my husband and I were engaged in light conversation and laughter, my daughter remained in tears. I remarked, "Your maturity level needs to significantly improve before we plan another outing like this," to which she protested, claiming we were supposed to be sympathetic toward her. I reminded her that she had spat in my face, and she apologized, acknowledging that her behavior was unacceptable. My husband pointed out that none of the day's events should have occurred, beginning with her tantrum at the restaurant, which escalated over something trivial, her heightened sensitivity. This remark pushed her over the edge. She stomped her foot fiercely, and I warned her, "This vacation can end tonight if you do not stop." As we exited the Skyliner and returned to our resort, my daughter lamented that this was why she refrained from discussing her feelings with us. My husband replied that her unwillingness to communicate stemmed from her reluctance to accept logical perspectives. We addressed her behavior, explaining that she sought attention and had even looked to others in the Skyliner for validation after expressing her wish to never have been born. She indicated a desire for someone to listen and comfort her. My husband explained that she was expecting sympathy for a situation of her own making and was fixated on receiving pity. While discussing my earlier comment about her sensitivity, my frustrations peaked, prompting me to assert repeatedly, "You're too sensitive, you're too sensitive, you're too sensitive," 100 times. At one point, she began whining again while I was talking with my husband, which infuriated me. Consequently, I instructed her to accompany my husband while I walked back to our hotel room alone. They headed to the cafeteria to fetch me medicine for my toothache from their convenience store. Upon their return to the hotel room, I couldn't take the medicine they had gotten for me due to its adverse effects on my stomach. Therefore, my husband went to a nearby store at Disney World to find an alternative, bringing my daughter with him. When they returned, my daughter greeted me, and I responded in kind. We all eventually went to sleep. The following morning, my husband took my daughter to breakfast at the cafeteria, but I was unable to join them due to resurgent tooth pain from taking the previous night's medication. Once they returned to the hotel room, I was emotional and hugged my daughter, apologizing for my previous behavior. I expressed my desire to avoid being unpleasant on vacation, and she forgave me, assuring me it was all right. I am sharing this almost a month later because it has been on my mind, and I feel remorseful. I have been firm with my daughter lately, as I have grown weary of her complaining about trivial matters, leaving me unsure if my reactions at Disney World were justified due to her troublesome behavior, or if I should have responded differently. Reddit, am I in the wrong for reprimanding my daughter and telling her to cease being so sensitive during her meltdown last month at Disney World? Story 4. Ayo, what do I do with my friend? First, I want to express that I am composing this and it is entirely genuine. I no longer know who to turn to for assistance, so I am reaching out to the users of Reddit. Even though everything I share is authentic, I will change the names for privacy reasons. Friend 1, Sophia is kind, despite having spoken poorly about me on numerous occasions. We always end up forgiving one another, and she is always willing to help with your issues. Friend 2, Laura is nice, but she insists that everything should go her way. If we fail to heed her, she becomes upset with us. When we do listen to her to avoid her anger, and our parents find out, she refuses to take responsibility. Consequently, her parents remain unaware of her actions. When we confront her and point out that much of the turmoil is her doing, she shifts the blame back onto us for listening to her and insists she never said certain things that she clearly has. Once you understand Sophia's character and Laura's behavior, it is easy to deduce who the true issue is in this situation. If you haven't figured it out yet, the problem lies with Laura. I will share some instances of her controlling behavior. Our parents have become aware, leading to conflict between Sophia and me because our mothers are best friends and confide in one another. Story 1, this incident occurred last week. I was recently given an electric scooter, while Sophia received hers from her uncle. However, Laura has owned her electric scooter for about a year, and, due to her lack of trust in Sophia and me, because we haven't had our scooters for even a month, she restricts us from riding on the road. Last week, Laura invited 2 friends over who also ride on the road, and both Laura and one of her friends began pressuring us to ride our scooters on the street without our parents' knowledge. Laura's friend remarked, "It's dull walking around here while people zip past us," and Laura followed up with, "If they bought the scooters, why can't we use them? They are meant for the road," sensing that we were reluctant. We grew concerned that one of our parents' friends might see us, relay the information to my aunt, and then she would inform my mother. Sophia and her mother remained silent to my mom. However, my aunt called my mother yesterday to disclose everything. When we confronted Laura about the situation, she claimed that the people questioning why we own scooters if we don't use them were not her friends, but rather a false narrative. The silver lining is that, at that moment, Laura's father happened to be at the park. My aunt ended up informing Laura's father about the incident, which led to Laura being reprimanded since it was ultimately her suggestion. Laura became angry with us following that revelation, and the next day, to avoid further conflict, we decided not to invite her to join us, resulting in a significant argument. Story 2. This one has a positive conclusion. Once, Laura, Sophia, and I visited the Chinese store. Laura began to steal items, and although the store owner did not notice our exit, while we were walking back, we encountered her. Given that it was frigid outside, the store owner confronted Laura, stating she had witnessed her stealing multiple items and that she owed payment for them. What could I tell my mother when we left the Chinese restaurant? Laura, not wanting our parents to know the truth as usual, pressured us to concoct a story asserting that I had accidentally taken something at night. I expressed my concern, telling her that my mother would disapprove, and suggested she come up with a different excuse. Laura then acted irrationally, claiming the amount was insignificant and that we could just tell my mother the truth. They were merely trying to scare her and she wouldn't face any consequences. Sophia and I devised a plan. I informed my mother about the scheme, and about 6 days ago, I returned to the Chinese restaurant with her. My mother noticed that the store owner always regarded us with suspicion and encouraged me to speak with her. When I did, the store owner explained that nothing was amiss. She had already reviewed the surveillance footage, confirming I was innocent, and advised us to be cautious regarding our friendships, mentioning that even Laura's younger sister had been known to steal. The issue being, Laura's sister is around 6 years old. Current problem, my aunt is quite chaotic, but she genuinely wants the best for both me and Sophia. She has told our mothers everything and has managed to persuade them that we should no longer associate with Laura. The dilemma is that I attend class with Laura, and if I cut ties with her, I will be completely alone. When our parents see us with Laura, they reprimand us, and if they allow us anywhere Laura is present, they limit our time to less than an hour. Whenever we fail to answer their queries about going out, she prowls around town trying to locate us. She is genuinely obsessed with not being excluded. Today, Laura began messaging us early, asking if we could meet in the morning. I had already informed her I was preoccupied with homework and couldn't join, but Sophia felt compelled to fabricate an excuse. Laura then presented countless solutions over 3 hours of arguing about whether she could come over or not, and ultimately, in the afternoon, we decided to see her. However, our parents punish us whenever they discover we are with her. We are now compelled to conceal everything happening until summer, since being left alone in class is unbearable. Despite our attempts to explain to our parents the entire situation, they simply urge us to stop seeing her, indifferent to whether I end up isolated in class.